Uncle, take this.
What is it, kid?
$1. Take it, buy something warm for your stomach.
He gave his last dollar to a homeless veteran. What happened 3 hours later will break you. When 17-year-old Ethan Nguyen gave his last dollar to homeless veteran Bill in the snow, neither expected how this simple act would slowly transform both their lives over 6 difficult months. Lincoln Park lay buried under December snow as evening shadows stretched across frozen benches. The bitter wind carried promise of another harsh night while most people hurried past, eager to reach warm homes. But one figure sat motionless, cardboard sign barely visible. Homeless veteran, anything helps. Few stopped, fewer looked. Everyone had somewhere else to be on this freezing Tuesday evening. Ethan Nguyen, 17, walked home from his grocery store job, shoulders hunched against cold. His backpack contained leftover sandwiches dinner for him and Grandma Lynn, who'd raised him since his parents died when he was 8. The dollar in his pocket was all he had until Friday. Rent was due Saturday. Grandma's persistent cough worried him, but doctors cost money they didn't have. Bill Thompson, 45, tried keeping feeling in his fingers while snow accumulated on his worn army jacket. Combat engineer for 8 years until IED explosion in Iraq took his left leg below the knee. 20 years later, PTSD episodes and job losses had cost him everything: house, marriage, stability. His engineering degree meant nothing when employers saw the prosthetic leg, heard about mental health treatment, noticed gaps in employment history. The VA check helped, but wasn't enough for rent in a city where housing costs climbed faster than disability payments. Some nights test whether humanity survives in frozen hearts, and small kindnesses become the difference between hope and surrender. Ethan saw the homeless veteran shivering on the bench, military bearing evident despite hardship, while snow threatened to bury both his sign and his hope for human compassion on a night when freezing temperatures could prove fatal. Ethan stopped walking. Everyone else passed without acknowledgement, but something about the man's dignity reminded him of his grandfather, who died fighting in Vietnam. "Sir, you okay out here?" Bill looked up, expecting mockery but finding genuine concern. "Been through worse." Ethan studied the situation. His dollar wouldn't buy much, but might provide coffee that could help someone survive until morning. "There's a diner 2 blocks over. Coffee's 50 cents. Bill's eyes filled with gratitude. "I appreciate that, son, but I don't want to take your money. It's just $1, last one I have, but you need it more." The admission revealed Ethan's own poverty, while emphasizing his willingness to sacrifice for a stranger whose military service had protected freedoms civilian society took for granted. Bill accepted the dollar. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan Nguyen. You?" "Bill Thompson, combat engineer, Iraq War. Built bridges until one exploded too close." The brief history explained homelessness while establishing military legitimacy. "My grandfather served in Vietnam. Grandma said he had a hard time when he came home." "Your grandfather sounds like a good man. You got his compassion." They walked together through snow-covered streets while Ethan learned about Bill's engineering background, his lost family, his struggle with PTSD that made steady employment difficult despite valuable technical skills. "You're a smart kid. What are your plans after high school?" "College, if I can afford it. Taking care of my grandmother right now." At Murphy's Diner, owner Sarah Martinez recognized both the homeless veteran she'd served before and the teenager whose kindness had brought a paying customer. "Coffee's on the house tonight," Sarah announced, understanding small gestures during harsh weather could mean survival. Bill's gratitude encompassed not just warm beverage, but human dignity that Ethan's companionship had restored. "Don't lose that good heart as you get older, Ethan." Over following weeks, Ethan stopped by daily after work, bringing sandwiches and checking on Bill. Sarah began hiring Bill for maintenance tasks around the diner. His engineering precision proved valuable for repairs requiring reliability. "Bill earns every dollar," Sarah told questioning customers. His military discipline and technical knowledge made him ideal for jobs requiring attention to detail. Ethan began volunteering at Veterans Outreach Center on weekends, inspired by Bill's stories about brothers who'd served with honor but struggled with civilian transition. Bill helped Ethan with calculus homework, his engineering background making complex problems understandable through systematic approach. Engineering teaches you to break big problems into manageable steps. Same principle applies to everything. The wisdom resonated with Ethan, whose life required systematic approach to managing school, work, and grandmother's care while pursuing goals that poverty made difficult. Their friendship bridged generational gaps through mutual respect that transcended surface differences about housing status or educational background. Sarah's part-time employment enabled Bill to contribute rather than just receive, rebuilding self-worth that homelessness had eroded through societal rejection. But Ethan's world shifted when grandmother Lynn's persistent cough revealed something more serious than seasonal cold that herbal remedies couldn't address. "Grandma, you need to see a doctor." "Doctors cost money we don't have, Ethan." Sometimes the smallest acts create the largest changes when kindness connects strangers whose lives intersect at moments requiring courage to care despite personal struggles. 3 months later, Bill's steady work at Murphy's Diner had earned him small apartment above the restaurant, his first stable housing in 2 years. His engineering skills had proven valuable for maintenance throughout the building. Ethan's volunteer work had grown into coordinating supply drives for homeless veterans, his organizational abilities impressing center director, who offered him part-time paid position that helped with family expenses. But grandmother Lynn's condition had worsened despite her attempts to hide symptoms from grandson whose worry she didn't want to increase. Weight loss and fatigue couldn't be concealed from teenager who'd been caring for her welfare since childhood. Dr. Patricia Chen at Community Clinic diagnosed pneumonia, complicated by underlying condition requiring chest imaging, that revealed concerning shadows demanding specialist consultation that Medicaid approval process would delay for weeks. "Mrs. Nguyen needs surgical evaluation," Dr. Chen explained carefully. "The mass requires biopsy to determine treatment options." Ethan processed the word mass with growing fear about possibilities that medical terminology couldn't soften through euphemism designed to reduce patient anxiety about serious diagnoses. What does that mean for treatment costs? Surgery could range from $15,000 to $40,000 depending on complexity. Insurance might cover 70% after deductibles and approvals. The mathematics were devastating. Even with insurance, they'd owe thousands they couldn't afford on minimum wage income that barely covered rent and basic expenses. Bill witnessed Ethan's desperation as teenager faced impossible choice between grandmother's life and financial ruin, that could destroy what little stability they'd achieved through years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. Son, sometimes asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Ethan created modest GoFundMe campaign with goal of $8,000 to cover estimated out-of-pocket costs, sharing grandmother's story as war refugee who'd sacrificed everything to raise orphaned grandson while working multiple jobs. Initial response was disappointingly slow. After 2 weeks, donations totaled $340 from friends, teachers, and co-workers whose own financial struggles limited their ability to contribute substantially to medical crisis. People want to help, but everyone's dealing with their own problems, Ethan told Bill, while feeling defeated by community response that seemed inadequate for medical emergency requiring immediate attention. Bill's suggestion about local media attention seemed unrealistic until Sarah Martinez mentioned knowing reporter from Channel 7 who specialized in community interest stories about people overcoming challenges through mutual support. Michelle Santos does features about neighbors helping neighbors. Your story about caring for grandmother while volunteering with veterans might interest her, Sarah explained, while understanding that media attention could amplify fundraising beyond social media sharing that had produced limited results. 4 months after their first meeting, Channel 7's Michelle Santos interviewed Ethan at Veterans Outreach Center, where his volunteer coordination had helped dozens of homeless veterans access services while managing his own family crisis. "Tell me about your grandmother," Santos prompted, while camera captured teenagers' obvious affection for a woman who'd raised him despite limited resources and language barriers that had complicated her American integration. She came here with nothing after Vietnam War, lost her husband fighting alongside American soldiers, worked 3 jobs while learning English, never complained when she had to raise me after my parents died. The interview revealed character that couldn't be manufactured, genuine care for elderly refugee whose sacrifice had enabled grandson's success, while her current medical need exceeded their ability to reciprocate through financial resources. Bill provided context about Ethan's volunteer work that had begun with simple kindness during snowstorm, emphasizing teenagers' commitment to helping veterans despite facing personal struggles that could have justified focusing solely on family needs. "This young man gave me his last dollar when I needed hope more than money. His grandmother taught him that helping others creates better community for everyone." Santos recognized authentic story about reciprocal kindness that connected refugee grandmother, homeless veteran, and teenager whose compassion had inspired broader community service despite poverty that limited options. The 5-minute feature aired during evening news, Ethan's story reaching regional audience whose response began slowly but steadily as viewers shared content through social media that extended reach beyond initial broadcast. Over 3 days, donations increased to $2,100 as community members responded to authentic need rather than professional campaign that might have seemed calculated rather than genuine appeal from desperate family. Local businesses began contributing after employees shared story during lunch conversations, their modest donations reflecting sincere desire to help rather than corporate publicity, seeking that characterized larger charitable gestures. "We're making progress," Ethan told grandmother Lynn, while managing optimism about fundraising that remained far short of medical costs that specialists had estimated for necessary surgical intervention. But Lynn's condition deteriorated faster than fundraising progressed, requiring emergency room visit that produced additional bills while confirming urgent need for surgery that delay could make more complicated and expensive. "Ethan, we need to schedule surgery within 2 weeks," Dr. Martinez explained, while understanding that teenager faced impossible timeline for raising funds that medical emergency couldn't postpone for financial convenience. The deadline created pressure that transformed modest fundraising success into inadequate response to medical crisis, requiring immediate resolution through resources that community support hadn't yet provided, despite genuine sympathy for deserving family. Community response often begins slowly before gaining momentum, and medical emergencies rarely wait for fundraising to reach necessary levels through patient accumulation of small donations. Day before a scheduled surgery, fundraising had reached $4,800, still far short of estimated $12,000 needed for out-of-pocket costs that insurance wouldn't cover, despite policy that theoretically provided medical protection for catastrophic expenses. Hospital financial counselor explained payment options that included plans requiring monthly payments exceeding Ethan's total income, making surgery financially impossible despite medical necessity that couldn't wait for improved economic circumstances. "Mr. Nguyen, we understand your situation. Surgery can proceed with signed agreement for payment plan, but monthly obligations will be substantial given the remaining balance after insurance coverage." Ethan calculated impossible mathematics. $200 monthly payments for 5 years while supporting grandmother's recovery and maintaining current expenses that already strained minimum wage income from multiple jobs. Bill arrived with Sarah Martinez, both having witnessed Ethan's desperation as medical deadline approached without adequate financial resolution despite community support that had exceeded initial expectations but remained insufficient for healthcare costs. "Son, we've been thinking about additional fundraising approaches," Bill announced, while understanding that conventional methods had proven inadequate for emergency requiring immediate solution rather than patient accumulation of small donations. Sarah's proposal involved reaching out to regional veteran organizations whose members might respond to story about teenager whose kindness to homeless veteran had inspired broader community service while facing family medical crisis. VFW and American Legion posts throughout state have members who've supported other veterans' families during emergencies. Your volunteer work gives you credibility that might generate larger contributions. The suggestion offered hope while acknowledging that time constraints made traditional fundraising campaigns impractical for medical emergency requiring immediate financial commitment before surgical intervention. Regional veteran organizations responded within days as Bill's contacts throughout military community shared Ethan's story about teenager whose compassion had restored homeless veterans' dignity while facing personal crisis that resonated with families who'd experienced medical emergencies. VFW Post 847 contributed $1,500 from Emergency Assistance Fund, while American Legion chapters throughout 3 counties collected additional $2,800 from members whose own experiences with healthcare costs had created empathy for family facing impossible choices. Military families understand medical emergencies that insurance doesn't cover adequately, explained VFW commander whose own family had faced similar crisis when spouse's cancer treatment had exceeded policy limits designed to minimize insurance company expenses. Combined with previous donations, fundraising reached $9,100, close enough to estimated costs that hospital agreed to proceed with surgery while establishing reasonable payment plan for remaining balance that Ethan's income could potentially manage. "We're going to make it work," financial counselor announced, while understanding that families' community support had demonstrated worthiness for institutional flexibility. That policy normally didn't allow for uninsured patients. Surgery proceeded successfully as Dr. Martinez removed early-stage mass. That prompt intervention had prevented from spreading beyond surgical treatment, confirming that medical timeline had been crucial for outcome that delay might have compromised. "Your grandmother will recover completely," Dr. Martinez announced, while Ethan processed relief that medical crisis had been resolved through community support that had restored faith in human generosity during desperate situation. Bill witnessed transformation that had begun with teenagers' dollar during snowstorm, understanding that kindness had created connections leading to life-saving assistance that neither could have anticipated when friendship began through shared coffee. Recovery period. Final donations pushed total to $11,200, providing cushion for unexpected expenses during grandmother's recuperation that required time away from work while ensuring proper healing rather than premature return to employment that recovery costs couldn't afford. Regional news coverage about successful community fundraising had attracted attention from State University's Financial Aid Office, whose representative contacted Ethan about scholarship opportunities for students whose community service and academic achievement deserved recognition despite economic circumstances that limited college access. Your volunteer coordination and family responsibility demonstrate character that our scholarship committee values highly, admissions counselor explained while offering academic support that Ethan's grades and community service had earned through consistent effort rather than single dramatic gesture. Bill's engineering skills had attracted notice from construction company, whose owner had served in military and recognized value of hiring veterans whose technical training and work discipline had been proven through successful employment at Murphy's Diner. Starting position $42,000 with full benefits, hiring manager announced, while understanding that Bill's homelessness had been circumstantial rather than indicative of professional inability requiring ongoing social services rather than employment opportunity. Grandmother Lynn's complete recovery enabled her return to part-time work as translator for refugee services, her language skills and cultural knowledge providing income while helping other Vietnamese immigrants navigate systems that her own experience had taught her to understand. Community relationships that crisis had created continued through sustained connection rather than temporary charity that emergency had required, demonstrating how individual kindness had inspired collective generosity that benefited everyone involved rather than single recipient. Medical crises often reveal community character while creating opportunities for sustained relationships that extend beyond temporary assistance to encompass ongoing mutual support. 6 months after surgery, Ethan began freshman year at State University with partial scholarship covering tuition, while work-study position in financial aid office provided living expenses and valuable experience helping other students navigate funding challenges he understood personally. Bill's construction job had provided stable income enabling him to rent a small house where he hosted monthly dinners for veterans transitioning from homelessness, his experience guiding others through challenges he'd overcome through community support and personal determination. Grandmother Lynn had fully recovered while expanding her translator work to include medical interpretation, her bilingual skills helping other Vietnamese refugees communicate with healthcare providers during medical appointments that language barriers could complicate without cultural mediation. Sarah Martinez's diner had become an informal community center where people gathered to discuss charitable opportunities that Ethan's story had revealed throughout region whose residents had discovered capacity for mutual assistance during genuine emergencies. Sometimes good things happen slowly, then all at once, Ethan reflected while processing transformation that had begun with simple kindness during snowstorm and developed through sustained relationships rather than dramatic rescue that Hollywood preferred over realistic community cooperation. Monthly fundraising for medical emergencies had become systematic rather than crisis-driven as community members contributed small amounts regularly to assist families facing health care costs that insurance policies couldn't cover adequately. University academic pressure tested Ethan's time management as engineering courses required study hours that conflicted with work responsibilities necessary for supporting grandmother, whose medical expenses continued despite surgical success that had resolved immediate crisis. Ethan's struggling to balance school and work, Bill observed during weekly dinner with veteran friends whose own educational challenges had been complicated by financial pressures requiring employment that interfered with academic success. Grade point average that scholarship required remained achievable, but demanded sacrifices that social activities and rest that college experience normally included, creating stress that academic counselor recognized during appointment about maintaining financial aid eligibility. Mr. Nguyen, your work schedule may be affecting academic performance. Consider reducing employment hours to focus on studies that scholarship success requires, counselor suggested, while not understanding that family financial needs made reduced income impossible despite academic requirements. Veterans Organization Scholarship Committee offered additional support after Bill's recommendation highlighted Ethan's continued community service despite university demands that left little time for volunteer activities that had originally inspired charitable donations. Academic success serves community by creating educated leaders who remember their roots, VFW commander explained, while increasing scholarship amount that would enable reduced work hours without compromising family financial stability. Second semester brought academic confidence as improved study time enabled better grades, while continued volunteer coordination for homeless veterans provided practical experience complementing engineering coursework that theoretical knowledge couldn't supply alone. You're becoming leader that community needs, Bill observed, while Ethan's coordination of supply drives had helped 50 veterans access services during winter months, when homelessness posed greatest dangers to vulnerable populations. Construction company owner who'd hired Bill offered Ethan summer internship that would provide engineering experience while paying wages sufficient for reducing academic year work requirements that interfered with studying necessary for maintaining scholarship eligibility. Your volunteer work demonstrates project management skills that our company values highly, owner explained, while recognizing that Ethan's community service had developed leadership abilities that traditional internship programs couldn't provide through academic assignments alone. Grandmother Lynn's translator work had enabled her financial independence, while her medical recovery had inspired other elderly refugees to seek preventive health care, rather than waiting for emergencies that crisis intervention couldn't address as effectively as early treatment. Ethan's kindness to Bill saved my life by showing me that asking for help creates opportunities rather than admitting weakness. Lynn explained, while community relationships had provided support network that isolation couldn't supply during aging process requiring assistance. Junior year brought recognition from engineering faculty, whose recommendation for research assistantship provided stipend replacing work-study position while offering graduate school preparation that academic achievement had earned through consistent effort rather than single, exceptional performance. Mr. Nguyen's community service demonstrates engineering applications for social problems that our profession should address more actively, department head announced, while understanding that Ethan's background had created perspective that traditional students might lack about real-world challenges. Bill's promotion to construction supervisor had enabled him to hire other veterans whose transition from homelessness required employment opportunities that understanding supervisors could provide through patience with challenges that military service had created rather than civilian employment causing. Working for someone who understands makes all the difference, explained veteran whose PASD episodes had cost previous jobs, until Bill's supervision had provided accommodation that enabled productive employment rather than continued unemployment cycle. Regional recognition of community fundraising model had inspired similar programs in 12 cities, whose medical emergency assistance funds had helped 200-plus families avoid bankruptcy from healthcare costs that insurance policies couldn't cover during serious illnesses. Ethan's story demonstrated that systematic community response works better than crisis-driven charity, explained social worker whose coordination of regional program had been inspired by successful local model that sustained assistance had created. Graduation day. Ethan's engineering degree represented achievement that community support had made possible, while his acceptance to graduate school with full assistantship demonstrated academic success that family sacrifice and community investment had enabled through sustained commitment rather than temporary assistance. Your education honors everyone who helped along the way, Grandmother Lynn observed, while understanding that her grandson's success had been collective achievement rather than individual accomplishment that solitary effort could have produced without community relationships. Bill's small construction company had grown to employ 15 veterans whose skills had been underutilized by employers who couldn't see past homelessness to recognize professional capabilities that military training had developed through challenging circumstances. Everyone deserves second chance when they're willing to work for it, Bill reflected, while his own transformation from homeless veteran to successful businessman had inspired others facing similar challenges that seemed insurmountable without community support and personal determination. Murphy's Diner displayed photos of community members whose stories had inspired charitable giving, while Sarah Martinez's establishment had become symbol of how individual businesses could serve as catalysts for collective generosity. that addressed genuine needs through sustained relationships rather than temporary sympathy. 5 years later, Dr. Ethan Nguyen returned from engineering graduate school to establish nonprofit organization providing technical solutions for community problems, while Bill's construction company had become regional leader in hiring veterans whose skills served community development projects throughout area. The Community Medical Assistance Fund had helped 85 families over 3 years, while Bill's Veteran Employment Program had provided jobs for 32 former homeless veterans whose skills had been underutilized by employers lacking understanding of military capabilities. Ethan's engineering nonprofit had completed 12 community projects, while his graduate degree had been earned through research focusing on infrastructure solutions for underserved populations. Grandmother Lynn's translator services had assisted 200-plus refugees, while her medical recovery had inspired preventive healthcare programs for elderly immigrants whose cultural barriers had prevented early intervention. Sarah Martinez's diner had facilitated $47,000 in charitable donations while serving as informal community center where neighbors gathered to discuss mutual assistance opportunities that individual crises had revealed throughout region. Regional medical emergency assistance programs operated in 8 cities, while systematic community response had proven more effective than crisis-driven charity for families facing healthcare costs that insurance policies couldn't adequately cover. 7 years later, Dr. Ethan Nguyen's community engineering projects had served 15,000 residents, while Bill's construction company employed 28 veterans whose stable housing and meaningful work had ended cycles of homelessness affecting military families throughout region. Their enduring friendship had demonstrated that authentic relationships formed through mutual respect transcend economic circumstances while creating opportunities for collective growth that individual effort couldn't achieve alone. They learned that some transformations begin with simple kindness, but require sustained commitment to develop into lasting change that benefits entire communities rather than single recipients of charitable assistance. Medical crises revealed community character while creating opportunities for systematic response to problems that affected many families whose health care costs exceeded insurance coverage designed to minimize corporate expenses rather than protect patient welfare during serious illnesses requiring expensive treatment that early intervention might have prevented through accessible preventive care serving vulnerable populations whose needs systematic programs could address more effectively than emergency charity responding to individual crises after problems had become catastrophic rather than manageable through timely assistance. Some transformations begin with simple kindness, but require sustained commitment to develop into lasting change that benefits entire communities rather than single recipients, proving that authentic relationships create opportunities for collective growth that individual effort could never achieve alone.